Away, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Transgender Rights in South Africa series. If you haven't seen episode 1 yet, I suggest you go back and watch that. I will put a link above so you can go and click on that. We pretty much covered what the legal framework is for rights for people in South Africa, with specific focus on the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. So I do encourage you to go ahead and check that one out before watching this one. Okay, so in this episode, we're going to dial in a little bit of focus around what the law says specifically in relation to what rights transgender people have in South Africa. In the previous episode, we spoke about the Constitution and how everybody in this country enjoys the same rights. Specifically, that everybody in this country enjoys the right to equality and not to be unfairly discriminated against on the basis of their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, etc. And there's a whole long list. I will link some resources below for you so you can go ahead and check that out. But in a nutshell, South Africa only has one bit of legislation, as far as I know, that mentions transgender people. And that is the Alteration of Sex Descriptor and Sex Status Act 49 of 2003. And I know that's a mouthful. We'll go into that a little bit later. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about this. Now, some of you may have encountered the concept before, and for those of you who haven't, let's just give you a quick crash course. SOGIESC is an acronym that stands for Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Expression, and Sex Characteristics. Now, sexual orientation is something that most people are familiar with, and that means who you are attracted to. So if you are gay, it means that you are a man who are attracted to other men. If you are a lesbian, you are a woman who are attracted to other women. If that makes sense. So sexual orientation is who you are attracted to. It has everything to do with the other person. So the GIE in the acronym stands for Gender Identity and Expression. Effectively, what that means is gender is your internal sense of who you are as a person. So where sexual orientation, the focus is placed on the other person, so it's who you are attracted to. Gender identity is who you are internally as a human being. It's an internal thing. Gender expression is how you manifest that identity. So somebody who has a masculine internal sense of who they are might have a very different gender expression to that identity. So somebody may be very masculine and on the inside but present as very femme. Likewise, somebody who has a very feminine internal sense of self might manifest that outwardly as either feminine, or it might be manifesting as masculine. So for example, a woman can dress very masculine and can express themselves in the ways that we consider things to be masculine, which is also kind of weird in the same kind of way. And the same is true for men, who can express themselves masculinely or femininely, if that makes sense. I don't know if those are the right terminology, but you get what I'm trying to say. Now, in the same kind of breath, there are gender identities that are not as binary, or not as kind of, let's call it extreme ends of the spectrum. So there are identities in the kind of middle, or that exist outside the space, and so these people may identify as being non-binary or gender fluid or gender queer. And so effectively just what that means is that somebody's not exclusively identifying as being masculine or feminine or man or woman. So that's gender identity and gender expression. Sex characteristics specifically refer to a human being's biology. So sex characteristics are those characteristics that we use as markers to effectively classify a member of a particular species as strictly being male or strictly being female. Now, there are a number of these characteristics, and they include things like gonads, hormones, external genitalia. So there are a whole number of them. And when a particular member of a species ticks all those boxes and neatly fits into those categories, we'll classify them as either being male or female. For the most part, the majority of people have never had all of their sex characteristics tested to kind of determine whether they neatly fall into the box of male or female. How that's usually determined is in the kind of situation, where a person is giving birth, the doctor, nurse, or midwife, or whoever's delivering that baby, will look between the baby's legs and go, oh, congratulations, it's a girl or it's a boy. So what that person is doing is having a look at one of these six characteristics, only one, and making a determination as to what the gender identity of that child is at that point in time, based on that evaluation on one of the sex characteristics. And so a lot of the data and the research that is coming out is that for the most part, most people don't very, very neatly and strictly fall into the categories that strictly define something as being male or strictly define something as being female. And most people fall on a spectrum in between that. So people might have, different kind of hormone levels. Not all the hormone levels are the same for everybody. Not everybody's external genitalia look the same. So this notion about sex characteristics, why it's important to understand in this context, is that in the law, most of what we talk about in terms of transgender rights in this country have absolutely nothing to do with sex characteristics. So for the purposes of us here today in this episode, what we're talking about is gender identity and gender expression, and not sex characteristics. Because transgender people are people whose gender identity isn't in alignment with the one that was assigned to them at birth. I.e., who we are as people on the inside isn't in alignment with what the doctor, nurse, or midwife had said we are by a kind of evaluation of our external genitalia, if that makes sense. So hopefully that's a little bit of clarity around that. Now, transgender people in this country enjoy the same rights as everyone else, to make that absolutely clear. There is no differentiation in South African law between trans people and other people. So we are not afforded any kind of special rights in any kind of way. We are considered to be equal kind of people before the law, and we enjoy all of the same rights that everybody else does, and everybody else enjoys the kind of same rights that we do. So the law doesn't differentiate between transgender people and cisgender people. But there is a bit of legislation that kind of gets a little bit weird. Now, to talk about the kind of elephant in the room, the Department of Home Affairs is what we call the custodian of identity in the country. Effectively, they manage identity, they create the systems in order to kind of keep track of who is in the country, the kind of demographic information about that person, and that their databases are effectively up to date. Yeah. So in 2003, a bit of legislation was passed in South Africa called the Alteration of Sex Descriptor and Sex Status Act 49 of 2003. That's a mouthful, so we just call it Act 49. Act 49 is the guiding legislation that provides the framework for which transgender people are able to amend their gender markers in South Africa. Now, while it is amazing that South Africa has legal gender recognition laws for transgender people, the law is still a little bit problematic. And the clause that kind of governs this reads as follows. Any person whose sexual characteristics have been altered by surgical or medical treatment or by evolvement through natural development resulting in gender reassignment, or any person who is intersexed, may apply to the Director General of the National Department of Home Affairs for the alteration of the sex description on his or her birth register. Okay. Effectively, what this means is if you are transgender or you are intersex, you may apply to the Department of Home Affairs to have your birth register amended to reflect your appropriate sex description. Yeah. Can you see how those words are problematic? Now, for transgender people specifically, the legislation does go on to say the following. An application contemplated in subsection 1 must, which is the section that describes somebody who is transgender or intersexed, must be accompanied by the birth certificate of the applicant, and then in the case of a person whose sexual characteristics have been altered by surgical or medical treatment resulting in gender reassignment, must be accompanied by reports stating the nature and results of any procedure carried out and any treatment applied, prepared by the medical practitioners who carried out the procedures. So effectively what this means is that if you are transgender in South Africa and you want to amend your official documentation with the Department of Home Affairs to reflect your appropriate gender identity, you must firstly have had medical or surgical intervention to alter your sex characteristics, to bring that in alignment with your, gender. And then 2, the medical practitioners who administered that must write reports attesting to such change. and such procedures or treatment. So the model that the Department of Home Affairs in South Africa works on currently for legal gender recognition is one that is medicalized. So in order to access the service, you effectively need to see a medical practitioner, not one, but two in terms of the legislation, who are able to write reports for you to attest that you have in fact, either been on hormonal therapy or you've gone through some kind of surgical intervention to alter your sex characteristics. Write that report, sign that document, then you make your application to the Department of Home Affairs. Yeah. So the fundamental problem with this model is that it is not based on any kind of human rights framework at all. For trans people trying to access this service, it is a direct infringement on their human dignity of who they are as people. Effectively, it means that your gender identity is only valid in terms of the eyes of the law, which is a protected ground in terms of the Constitution, is only valid in the eyes of the Department of Home Affairs in terms of Act 49 if you have had surgery or if you have had medical intervention, which is all kinds of wrong and problematic. But then also, to just access healthcare in South Africa is such a problem. We have a major problem with our state healthcare. It is so completely overburdened, and many of the state institutions are not equipped to be able to provide gender affirming care to trans clients. And so what that translates to is that if you are unable to afford kind of private healthcare, which is so extraordinarily expensive, your ability to amend your gender marker with the Department of Home Affairs, which should be such a simple process, is now being barred because you can't access gender affirming healthcare. So while we have this wonderful legislation that goes, everybody's equal before the law and we should all enjoy the same rights, and we have this bit of legislation that kind of allows us to amend our gender markers, allows us to amend our official documentation, is now suddenly sitting in a weird place because fundamentally Act 49 creates a conflict with the right to dignity, with the right to equality, to bodily autonomy as well. So what we have on paper is very different to what is in practice, and we will talk about that and the lived realities of trans people in the next episode. As always, if you've been enjoying this content, please remember to hit that subscribe button and turn the bell on for notifications to stay in the loop for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.